Okay, and with that, I have 2 o'clock Eastern, 12 o'clock Mountain Time by me, and we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank everyone again for joining into this webinar. This is one of the final webinars we're going to be doing in this Pro series, and I really do appreciate how much time people have committed to learning more about Knowify and tuning into this series. You know, a lot of hard work went into putting these webinars together, so I'm happy to see that people are showing interest and that it's all paying off here. And today's topic is going to be Knowify's integration with QuickBooks Online. And this is definitely one of the most popular topics and one of the biggest topics that we're discussing on the support side of Knowify. Obviously, having this integration with QuickBooks Online is a huge benefit to using Knowify in that it keeps you from having to double enter information. It makes sure that you get all of your accounting information as accurate as possible, and it just kind of makes sure that you don't have to do too much work in the QuickBooks Online account itself if you need to avoid that. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Terrin Kalian. I run our customer experience team at Knowify. So basically, anything that involves Knowify interacting with customers, best chances are you've had to interact with me at some point. I've been with Knowify for about 5 years now, and I'm also based in our Denver office. So again, if you ever interact with me in support, now you have a little face to put to the name. But just a quick overview of what we're going to be going over in this webinar. First and foremost, I'm just going to show you how to connect your account to QuickBooks Online if you haven't yet. Once we get through that, because that's a really quick topic, I'm going to be covering how to set up default accounts, how to initially set up that mapping from Knowify to QuickBooks. And once I set that up, I'm actually also going to be showing you what the transactions look like when you put them in Knowify and when they sync to QuickBooks, just so you can see how to get everything to the very specific accounts that you want when information syncs across. And that's a big benefit of using Knowify is that we're not just dumping everything into QuickBooks and then it's their problem from there on out. We really do give you this detailed, granular syncing with your QBO account to make sure that it ends up in the right place, not just whichever place it works out. I'll also be covering some time syncing. That's going to be another quick topic, but it's definitely one that people are often interested in. So I'd like to cover a little bit more about how to get that completed in your account. And I'll also be covering how to pull expenses from QuickBooks to Knowify, since that's also a very popular topic. We know a lot of great apps do integrate with your QuickBooks Online account, and they'll get the expenses into QuickBooks. So we want to be able to get those expenses from your other apps into Knowify through QuickBooks. And so I'll cover a little bit more about that flow. At the end, I will be doing a Q&A. I will say this webinar is likely to run a little bit longer than some of the others, so we might not be able to get to every question, but a way to give your question a better shot of being answered, please do enter them in the Q&A and not in the chat. We won't be covering any questions that are entered into the chat part of Zoom, so definitely enter them into the Q&A part. But without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and open up my Knowify account. I'm going to go and disconnect QuickBooks just so you can see how this happens. And I'll show you how to get everything connected to your QuickBooks. So if I go to my admin section and I click on QuickBooks, there's going to be an option here that says connect to QuickBooks. Mine's going to be referencing a reconnect because this account's already been connected in the past, but this is as easy as it is. I just click connect to QuickBooks. If I'm already logged into QuickBooks, then I don't really need to do much else. I just need to click connect and it approves. Otherwise, it'll just ask you to log into QuickBooks. And that's really going to be the first step to then importing your data from your QuickBooks account into Knowify. So let's just say this was a blank Knowify account, which, of course, in this case isn't true. But what we would do is go to your QuickBooks and pull in all of your clients, vendors, your products and services, your chart of accounts, your tax rates, your payment terms, all of the basic information in QuickBooks that needs to be in Knowify so you can start managing your all of your projects and making sure that it's synced up. I always recommend one of the first things you should do once connecting is click on clients and confirm that you have the same number of clients in Knowify as you do in QuickBooks. There might be a little bit of discrepancy between the two if you use Knowify before connecting. That's common. It shouldn't cause any issues. But that's a good way to make sure that the sync is indeed working. Is if you do have a clients and vendors list populated here. And what I'm going to get into next, now that we're connected, is how to map out everything between Knowify and QuickBooks. And a lot of where we're going to be covering in this webinar is this QuickBooks module. Looks like I got to reconnect. Sorry about that. And basically, the QuickBooks module is going to be where I am making sure that when Knowify syncs to my QuickBooks account, everything is hitting the right specific spots, so I don't have to reclassify anything once it gets to my QuickBooks. The first page of this module is our transactions feed. This is going to show us everything that's synced between Knowify and QuickBooks, and it's going to give as much information as possible on each of these transactions. The first one, showing complete, is just saying whether or not they were a success. As in, if there's an issue with something going from Knowify to QuickBooks, you'll be able to see an error here. It's pretty common, and they're usually very easy to fix. So let us know if you ever run into those. We're always happy to work with those. But just to go through this specific line, it's saying there's a completed transaction. It was a client. Then the activity is what type of change was made. So I can see a client updated in Knowify, a client created in Knowify. And that's what this origin column is. This is saying if it's something that was created in QuickBooks, like this bill payment, or if it was created in Knowify, like this time entry. And so this is almost like an audit trail, just so you can see what's moving back and forth between Knowify and QuickBooks, so you can get a better idea of if there's something wrong or if there's something that you want to check whether or not it's synced. This is going to be the go-to spot. Next, what I'm going to set up is my expenses defaults. Now, the basic mapping of Knowify to QuickBooks is going to just cover these top accounts that we will see on all of these default screens, where it's going to ask, what is our default expense account? And basically what this is saying is, if nothing else is specified, what do you want to be the absolute fallback, need to use something expense account when you log a new expense in Knowify and it syncs to QuickBooks? So basically, this uncategorized expense is going to be referenced in a situation where I haven't set a expense account at the vendor level. And this is the next level down, where if I want to be more specific than push everything to uncategorized expense, I could say push everything to uncategorized expense unless it's an expense with ABC supply. In that case, push it to job materials. Same thing goes with payment accounts. When I'm logging payments to vendors, I have the overall that it goes to Bank of America, but I also have the ability of saying, well, when we pay ABC Supply, it actually comes from our savings. So make sure that it overrides and uses this instead. And so that's how you can have this fallback account for both your chart of accounts for expenses, and then also for your payment accounts when you're tracking the balance of bank accounts in QuickBooks. Similarly with income, you set a default payment account. This is again when clients pay you. Do you deposit into savings or your Bank of America, anything like that? Basically, this is your way of being able to track payments logged into Knowify, which again, the payments are bidirectional, so we'll get into that a little bit more later. But then more important probably when it comes to tracking your income is that it doesn't give you a default income account, it's a default income service. And again, I'm going to get around to actually showing examples of all these. I just want to cover what this initial mapping is going to look like. And the reason we ask for a service and not an account, I'm going to actually just enter a new invoice into QuickBooks very briefly. I won't go through the whole process. We just wanted to show you how basically QuickBooks is going to request a product or service on every line of an invoice. Knowify has that option, but we don't require it like QuickBooks does. So what you're setting here is basically a way of saying, if I don't specify in Knowify which income service I want to use on an invoice, you can assume it's construction services. But again, just similarly to our expenses defaults, it doesn't have to put everything here because you can get more specific at the client level, where I could say, well, it all goes to construction services unless it's the client, 45 Broadway, in which case it's this disconnect switch product, which is kind of a funny thing to set here, but beside the point. And then if you're using jobs as sub-clients, which again, I'll cover a little bit more in a bit, you can click the show jobs instead. And you could say, well, on specific jobs, and there's a couple in here, I'm not going to take too much time searching. I'll be able to set a specific income service per each job instead of setting it at the client level. I'll be showing you when we get more into the income and invoice syncing how we can get specific income accounts or income services per each invoice that we create as well. But this is where you do the overall fallback mapping, where I say if no one else specified anything different in our Knowify account, assume that it goes to construction services. Job defaults are going to be where we set things like what service item we use on time entries. Same with deposits if you have the deposit feature enabled, syncing retainage. And then you can set a default class for your jobs if you use QuickBooks classes. And so let's say I have a class for, well, all of my contract jobs are commercial work and my service jobs are all residential. It's just a way so I don't have to come back here and make adjustments where I can set the class per each job as well. Similarly, we actually sync with locations. So if you're using the QuickBooks location feature, you can specify, which location of your business or however you guys are using this feature, this job is going to be classified under. The last part of the initial setup is going to be catalog defaults. Again, this is something where we're getting very granular into our Knowify to QuickBooks sync, and I'll be covering how that works. But in the initial setup, we're going to want to go through the default income account and default expense account, where basically what I'm saying is if a new item, if a new product or service is added to the catalog in Knowify, what do you want to be the default income and expense account when it gets to QuickBooks? Because QuickBooks requires that you have a default income and requires that you have a default expense account on every item, but Knowify doesn't. And so this is basically your way of saying, well, unless we specify otherwise, this is what I want you to assume the default income and expense account are. And as a general rule of thumb, for those of you who are mapping out, Knowify to QuickBooks for the first time, when you're going through these top level defaults, try to keep them to services and accounts that are as commonly used as possible and as big as possible. So that way, when everything ends up in QuickBooks, it's not completely categorized to the wrong thing. It's either in an account that means we need to recategorize this, or it's in a catch-all account where it's technically not wrong, it's just not as specific as it could be. But now what I want to do is kind of show you how all of these defaults are going to work. I'm going to do it by logging a variety of expenses and invoices so you can kind of see what this is all going to look like. And I'll start with my default expense account, just so you can see how this highest level mapping works. Now, Amazon.com doesn't have a default expense account set to it, which means all Amazon expenses logged in Knowify will go to uncategorized expense. So I'm going to go with the most simple expense I possibly can. I'll come to purchases, add new purchase, and I'm going to say it's just a cash expense. And I'll choose that vendor, Amazon.com, materials, $10. And I'm not going to worry about job costing this right now. When I submit this and I send to QuickBooks, it's going to log a expense in my QuickBooks account. One thing that's neat here in Knowify is this Sync OK status button. What this is doing is, first of all, saying QuickBooks just sent us a response confirming that they've received this expense from us. What it does when I click it is it lets me click this View in QuickBooks link to automatically open up QuickBooks to that specific transaction. so that I actually am seeing, what was created in QuickBooks based off of the transaction I created in Knowify. And you can see that Amazon.com goes to uncategorized expense. Now I'm going to walk through another sample of this. Only I'm going to go to something that's set to a vendor default. So ABC Supply. In this case, I'm actually going to log a bill instead, just so you can see how it does the same thing in each instance. I'm going to click Add Item, and I'm actually going to choose a job in this case, so you can see what that's going to look like. And here's a quick thing I want to note, and I'll get into this in just a moment, is that when I'm typing in the name of an item, on the last one, I just wrote the word materials, and that's fine. But if I select an actual item from my catalog, it's going to use the default expense account associated with that item. And again, I'll cover that in just a moment. But again, I just want to show you, here's my bill. I'll enter some other information too, just so you can see how it all lines up. I have the job, the name of the item, the price, and I'll submit this and send it to QuickBooks. Again, this is just going to sync across where it says sync OK. I'll view this in QuickBooks. And I believe I had ABC Supply set to an account called Job Materials. Let's just go ahead and confirm that now. Bingo. And you can see that it carries over the invoice number, the due date of the bill, and I have that category set to Job Materials because the expense was with ABC Supply. You can see that it also brought over the customer information. In this case, Project 913 is a sub-customer in my Knowify account. Again, I'll cover that later on when I cover pulling expenses, but I just wanted you to see how that does carry over into your QuickBooks account. Now, the way our sync works with QuickBooks is I can log a bill payment in my QuickBooks account, and that'll sync back to Knowify. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and mark this as paid, and I'm going to do it as a partial payment just so you can see a little bit more about how that works. So if I log a $5 payment against this bill, and I go back to my Knowify account, another important thing to note when it comes to syncing Knowify with QuickBooks is that, as you've seen, everything from Knowify to QuickBooks syncs as soon as I submit the transaction. Everything from QuickBooks to Knowify syncs automatically while you're logged in once an hour, I believe. It also will sync when you log in, just to make sure that since the last time you logged in, everything's synced up. But another option you have is to click this Sync Now button to kind of tell Knowify, hurry up and see what's in QuickBooks. So I can see that right now the bill is outstanding in the amount of $10. I'm going to go ahead and click Sync Now. And then once it's done syncing, it'll show me that the bill is outstanding in the amount of $5 instead. And let's see if we got this payment in. I hope I logged against the right bill here. Sorry, I'm never really the best QuickBooks user, so I'll just go ahead and make sure I have this set up correctly. Yeah, so I didn't even mark the payment against the bill. I must have marked it against another one. Sorry about that, guys. Again, not the best QuickBooks user here. But I do want to show you what payments from Knowify to QuickBooks are going to look like, which is why I did the partial payment there. And basically, the idea is that when I logged that Amazon expense, it automatically pulled from Bank of America because that was my payment default. It's blank in Amazon, so it goes to the company level one. But when I log a bill payment for that transaction, the bill transaction with ABC Supply, I'll say record payment, send to QuickBooks. Once this syncs into my QuickBooks account, I'll be able to view that payment, and it'll show me that the payment account is savings instead of our Bank of America account, because we mapped it a little bit more specifically. And so that's kind of just how these mappings work, is that you're setting it at the catch-all company level first, just to make sure that everything can sync. And then if you need to get more specific based off of your relationship with vendors, based off of what you're buying from them, this is where you can actually map everything and get a little bit more granular. But one of my most common questions asked is, well, we buy a lot of different things from ABC Supply and from Amazon. How do I get different expense accounts for one vendor? And that's where these catalog defaults come into play, where you have your list of products and services, and each one has its own expense account. And so I'm going to use the example of this wire, which is set to electrical. And I'm also going to use this disconnect switch, which I'm going to set to job materials. So again, if I look at, and I'll use Amazon as my example, Amazon with no account should go to uncategorized expense. But if I log a purchase and I make it a cash purchase with Amazon, and I search the database and I say, to AWG, and I select this item, write in my quantity, job costed if necessary. It's going to know that this goes to the electrical account. And just to show you how we can get a little bit more specific when we do these things, if I type in disconnect switch, you'll note this little icon that looks like Knowify's catalog icon. What this is telling you is Knowify now knows that you are mapping this to the disconnect switch account. So if I want to make this a simpler phrasing and I just want to call it disconnect switch, let's say I want to get very specific for bathroom, whatever it's going to be. Doesn't really make sense, but you get the idea. Then it's still going to map to the job materials account because that's what disconnect switch is set for, but I get to rewrite what the description is. So I'll go ahead and submit this. It's going to sync into my QuickBooks account. And I'm going to be able to get all of this really granular reporting on, how much am I spending on each different type of material that's going into my jobs. And I always find that this is the most handy thing that Knowify does when it comes to syncing with QuickBooks, is that you can really get very specific when it comes to syncing everything up here. And we'll cover this later, but you can see how classes have also synced across because I had a class set for project 929. So that's the basics of syncing expenses from Knowify to QuickBooks. What I'm going to get into next is actually syncing our invoices, our revenue. And I'm going to start doing that by adding a new job to my account. And I'll choose a client from the database. And for what it's worth, the client database is bidirectionally integrated with my QuickBooks account. So if I added a new client here, it would just show up in QuickBooks. It's just a nice way to make sure that you never have to do this stuff twice. But just to speed things up, I'm going to create a job that's fixed price. I'm going to choose advanced, and I'll cover that, why I chose that in a bit. And I'm going to create a new contract job. Now, similarly to what we did when we were setting the item when logging purchases, so it syncs to the specific item in QuickBooks, we could do that when we're setting up contracts, where I can add an item of a contract and say demolition for $2,000, add item. But what I can do is make sure that I'm hitting specific accounts in my QuickBooks account, and by account in this case, I mean income services, where I could say framing, and it'll search my products and services. So I can say use the framing and rough carpentry item, and we charge $5,000 for this. And again, very similarly to what we did on that last expense, I also have the ability of saying cabinet installation, we're charging $6,000, but you'll see this icon again. And that's Knowify's way of saying, we know which item you want to use in QuickBooks, so you can call this whatever you want now. So if I want to call this kitchen cabinets, as long as that item is still there, It doesn't matter what I call this. It's just going to end up using this, same, product or service in QuickBooks. Now I'll go ahead and make this active. Now, the way our sync works is whenever we don't specify an item, like in this case, demolition, you see it doesn't have a catalog item. So it means, Knowify is going to need to go to the default for the client. And if nothing's set at the client level, the default for my company. So again, I'm going to come back to my QuickBooks module. I'm going to check my income default since we're dealing with invoices. I can see that anything that's not specified at the client or job level should go to income service, to construction services. I'll check Carl client. I can see that he doesn't have anything set, so it should be going to construction services. And now I'm going to create an invoice for this job. I'll come back to my contract and change orders, invoice now. And just to kind of make it a nice, simple invoice that touches all bases, I'll click confirm, and I will finalize. And actually, before I finalize, I'd like to note, you may see the sales tax here. These sales tax rates, as I had mentioned earlier, come in from your QuickBooks account. And so when you are logging an invoice, you're actually selecting a specific tax rate that's in QuickBooks. So when I finalize this invoice and it syncs to QuickBooks, it's actually using this specific rate, so you can run your tax reports in QuickBooks as necessary. Again, I can see sync OK, view in QuickBooks. And I'm going to have the invoice that we created in Knowify and synced into our QuickBooks account. And you can see that the product and service has been selected for each line based off of our mapping from Knowify to QuickBooks. Demolition, we didn't specify an item, so it went to the default. Framing went to the framing and rough carpentry item. And then you can see that kitchen cabinets is still going to cabinet installation because that's what we had initially selected when setting up the job. A little side note here, if I go back to this contract, if I ever need to update these in the middle of a project, I can actually click this and change the item. Let's say I want this to switch to just framing and not rough carpentry moving forward. Then new invoices will go to the new account. And for the demolition one, which I never set to begin with, I can still associate this with a catalog item after the fact. And then that'll set it up so when I sync moving forward, it goes to the accounts that I selected. We'll go ahead and just log another invoice here. And some classic progress invoicing. Another 10% makes 20. But next, what I want to cover briefly is payments syncing between Knowify and QuickBooks. Again, this is something that syncs bidirectionally. So if I go to Knowify and I say record payment, send to QuickBooks, what this is going to do is use the default expense account set for Carl client. If nothing's set for him, it's going to use the one set to the company. In this case, I can come to income defaults, and it should be for Carl client, Bank of America. Although if it's set at the job level, let's see, it's going to go to savings. I'm going to go back to my transactions page, show you another shortcut. Whenever something syncs successfully, I can click where it says complete. And this is another thing that links me directly to QuickBooks, to the specific transaction that we had created. And you can see that this was deposited to my savings, and it shows me amount received and all of that good information. Again, though, if I log a payment in my QuickBooks account, here's the initial invoice we've created. I'll click receive payment. I'm not going to do anything fancy this time. Just go ahead and save this. I'm going to click sync with QuickBooks here. It's another version of that same button that you have in the bottom right corner. It just goes to QuickBooks and looks to see if there's anything new to pull in. I can see invoice payment created in QuickBooks. And I can click this to see the payment, and then click here to see the invoice. And you can see, this is the invoice that we created in Knowify. It's closed and fully paid. And I can see my payment here, and I can see that it's from QuickBooks. So that's just a little bit more about how we work between income and expenses to make sure that everything hits the right spot in your QuickBooks account. So nothing needs to be adjusted in QuickBooks for the most part. You're just using it Knowify naturally, selecting everything as you go, and it's ending up in the right spot in QuickBooks. One thing that's worth noting again is that in my job defaults, we have the ability to set the class and location, the class and location for jobs. So I could say, this is a to Wall Street transaction or a to Wall Street job. And it's just going to sync to that corresponding class and location on our invoices and bills and everything corresponding to that job. And we'll cover that. I mean, if I look at it should be on that invoice that we created earlier. Again, I can come here and click complete, and I'll be able to see the transaction. And to the best of my knowledge, it should have set the class to commercial, and I set location after the fact of creating this invoice, which is why it's not set here, but after that would populate as well. That's most of what I'm going to cover when it comes to expenses and income. But I do want to cover briefly time and how that syncs between Knowify and QuickBooks. And the highest level of this is when we get to job defaults, and you can see that we set a default service for time entries. In my case, I have it set to hours, but I'd like you to see where that comes into play. And I'm going to show you that by opening up this webinar job that we set earlier. Now remember that I used the advanced job costing style, which means my items from the contract are going to be appearing in my plan and track as phases. And again, you should be used to seeing this icon. This is a very important thing that we see when we're syncing with QuickBooks. That framing and rough carpentry item that we set in the contract sync to the phase as well. And then you see demolition, where we didn't set one, doesn't have anything here. I did set one for demolition after the fact, but again, once it syncs over into the phase, then the only way to set this up with an item is to enter it in, by editing the plan and setting it up later. But I just want you to see that demolition hours, since nothing is selected, should all sync to that default service for time entries, which we called hours. For framing and rough carpentry, since we set an item, it should all sync to framing and rough carpentry. So I'm going to enter some time here. I think my user that synced with QuickBooks is Paul Simon, so I'll enter 1 hour for him. That's demolition. And then I'll go to my framing rough carpentry and enter another hour for him. And then in review time, I'm going to go ahead and approve these hours. And for those of you who don't know, approving hours is how we then get them to sync to QuickBooks. And if I go to my QuickBooks account now, and I say new weekly timesheet, I can pull up Paul's timesheet, and I can see that these hours sync to hours and these ones sync to framing and rough carpentry. And so that's how you can get a little bit more specific of a map from Knowify to QuickBooks when it comes to time, so that if these users are getting paid differently, if they are getting if you need to track how many hours you spend on different types of services, here's a nice way to get that reporting into your QuickBooks account from Knowify as well. Now, one of the last things I'm going to be covering here is how to pull expenses from Knowify to QuickBooks. Sorry, from QuickBooks to Knowify. If I go to my admin section under Customize, and then in Customize, I have QuickBooks Customizations. There are two important features here that I want to cover. One is jobs as subclients. What this does is it sets up my QuickBooks account with a subclient whenever a new job is created in Knowify. That subclient is going to be how we can see how much we're spending on jobs in QuickBooks if the jobs are being tracked in Knowify. I know they have a projects feature. As of right now, they don't let us create a project, So we do the sub client instead. It's the the older version of the same thing that they always suggested to us, and this is what we have now. And the other feature, and I should also mention, you need to email us to get this enabled in your account. We'll just send you a guide to confirm that this does what you're looking for. But the other feature that you'll want to enable is pull expenses. Once these are enabled, first of all, new projects I create, and in this case, I'm going to use this weekly webinar example, webinar example. I can open up this project and it's going to create a subclient. Well, it has created a subclient. Again, you'll see the same sync OK button, view in QuickBooks, and it'll just show me that customer in my QBO account. Then when I log new expenses in my QuickBooks account, as long as I select this sub-customer as my customer on the expense, it's going to pull into Knowify to the corresponding job. So I'll say expenses, add a new, I'll say bill. This is going to be with Home Depot. I actually probably could have left that in, but yeah, I'll say job materials, miscellaneous materials for $100. And again, you see it says customer / product project. I could say webinar. And here's webinar example for income defaults, which we created earlier. And I'll go ahead and save this bill. I'll go back to Knowify. Again, sync now is our from QuickBooks to Knowify button. And if I go check on this project, it should have pulled to the first phase, miscellaneous materials for $100. And we give you this little via QuickBooks so you know a little bit more about where this expense came from. Now, you'll notice that it went to the first phase, demolition. That's going to be our catch-all. Again, we need to make sure that we hit the job in general. But here's where you can get really advanced with your input from QuickBooks to Knowify, is again, using these products and services that are tagged to your phases. So if I go and I log a bill again, new bill, this will also be Home Depot. I can actually skip the category details, go to my item details, and I could say this is for framing and rough carpentry. This is for cabinetry. And as I select these, what I'm basically selecting is the phase that I want associated with webinar example. I'll go ahead and save this bill. And now, instead of just defaulting to the first phase, which is always Knowify's fallback, it's going to categorize into individual phases based off of which product or service I tag to the lines of the bill, and then what product or service I tag to the lines of each phase. And I know this is a little bit more advanced than the common use of things, but it's always nice to know that you have this option to get very complex with how you sync from QuickBooks to Knowify as you need it. Another thing that's very popular when it comes to pulling from QuickBooks to Knowify is the job costing hub. So I'm going to show you one last example of an expense that I'm logging into QuickBooks that is going to hit Knowify. Go Home Depot again. And in this case, I'm actually not going to select a product or service. I'm just going to choose a category. And why not electrical, which is $1,000, and no customer to select here. Now, just because we didn't select a customer, it doesn't mean it's not going to go into Knowify. It just means that it's not going to go to any of our job costing because we don't know what job it's for. We just know that it's a bill. And so what I can do is come to my dashboard. I can click Job Costing Hub. I could say, show me everything that came in from QuickBooks and filter by everything that's not associated with the job. And here's a $1,000 bill logged on the 23rd from Home Depot. It switches. I could say, perfect. This was for the webinar example for income defaults, specifically the demolition if I need to. And that's how I can job cost anything that made it to Knowify, but not to the correct job, or not to any job at all. It just gives me the ability of dumping everything into Knowify and taking care of the job costing after the fact. I know this is a very popular workflow for a lot of people who just have a lot of transactions going through QuickBooks, and they just want to recategorize later on, or maybe they don't know the best way to get it from QuickBooks into the corresponding job in Knowify. This is definitely the safest way to get everything into the correct spot. And then again, if you are categorizing everything in QuickBooks and making it hit the right spot in Knowify, this is a way to make sure to double check that nothing got left behind or nothing got categorized incorrectly and showed up as unallocated. And that way you can make sure that it hits the right spot to Knowify afterwards. One last note on pulling expenses is that, let's say I have some expenses that are not necessary to be in Knowify at all. In my QuickBooks module under accounts, I can disable expenses from syncing into my Knowify account based off of what their expense account is. So if I'm logging a new bill and I select bank charges as the expense account, that's not going to sync into Knowify. That way, if let's say you have some sensitive information in QuickBooks, but someone in Knowify can see a lot of the other information, this way they can still see a lot of the bills that are coming into Knowify that are project related, but they won't see anything like, your building's rent, any kind of maybe corporate cars or something like that you're renting. It's nice to have that option, to make sure that the people in Knowify only see what you want them to see. And with that, I believe that's really everything I wanted to cover on how the integration from Knowify to QuickBooks works, how it goes from QuickBooks to Knowify. I could definitely get into, I could probably talk about this for several hours, but I just wanted to give my, detailed quick primer on everything that I think is important to know for most cases. Now I'm going to go ahead and get into the Q&A portion of this. The first question was, does it matter if you create an invoice in Knowify or QuickBooks? Assuming that you mean a client invoice and not a vendor invoice, which we'll always call bills. Invoices can only be created in Knowify and synced to QuickBooks. It's one of our few one-directional items. So, and then the follow-up to that question was, will the percentage breakdown show up or only in Knowify? Basically, that's why we make you invoice out of Knowify, is so we know which contract it's part of, which line of that contract, and what the new outstanding balance of that contract is. If you were to create the invoices in QuickBooks and pull them to Knowify, it's harder for us to match all of that up and make sure that your progress invoicing is, all on track. The next question was, what's the best way to set up clients and vendors in Knowify that don't exist in QuickBooks? Should it be done in QuickBooks or in Knowify, and how? So, for the most part, once you're connected to QuickBooks, there really shouldn't be anything that isn't synced between the two as far as clients and vendors go. Because if I come in here and I say add a new client, named Maria, then that's automatically going to show up in my QuickBooks account. You see how instantaneously that happens. So I always recommend you log into Knowify to get the fastest possible result. Because if you log in QuickBooks, as you saw earlier, I need to click that Sync Now button, which can definitely cause a little bit of a delay when it comes to this integration. So it's always best to add as much as possible into Knowify and push to QuickBooks because it just moves a little bit faster that way. The next question was how to get labor cost into QuickBooks because we only get hours. To put it simply, I don't believe they allow you to push in labor cost. If I look at this, you could set up billable rates for if you're invoicing customers for these hours, but the idea is that, all QuickBooks is accepting from us is the hours, so that's all we sync. If they make changes in the future, we'll very likely make changes to match, But right now, you can only push in the hours. We fill out as many of these fields as possible. There was a question of someone asked, why do I not have the accounts mapping or this accounts filter? If you don't have the pull expenses feature turned on, then it won't give you this accounts page. If you have pull expenses enabled and you don't have this, definitely reach out to us. It's probably just a small display error and we can fix that up very quickly. There was a question, can you hold off syncing Knowify to QuickBooks and then do one big sync at the end of an input session? We don't have anything for that. I mean, I suppose what you could do is disconnect from QuickBooks, work in Knowify, and then reconnect and sync everything. I would like to say I very strongly recommend against that. It's not going to give you a nice workflow. And the problem is that whenever something's disconnected between Knowify and QuickBooks, it opens up the door for sync errors. Just to give an example of how this could work, let's say, even while they're connected, if you add a client in QuickBooks first, you saw how there could be a delay on when it shows up in Knowify. So if someone is then entering something for that client in Knowify and they're already in QuickBooks but not in Knowify yet, they may add the client again in Knowify, which would then create either a duplicate where you have one in Knowify, one in QuickBooks, or they'll block each other from syncing because neither software wants a duplicate. So those are different situations in which we always recommend, if you can do as much as possible in Knowify and have this live sync to QuickBooks, it really does a lot to avoid having sync errors between the two softwares. There's another question of, if we decide to keep TSheets for tracking hours, how does that sync? Directly to QBO or does it sync through Knowify? So TSheets is a bit of a different case where the integration requires QuickBooks to really get the best sync between Knowify and TSheets. And basically, the time goes from TSheets to Knowify, but it also goes from TSheets to QuickBooks. And so it just syncs into different softwares for different reasons. The time from TSheets to Knowify is for job costing. That's how you can see that, hours spent versus hours budgeted, cost versus budget, all of that information on Knowify. How much am I spending on my labor hours at the job level? But the time goes into QuickBooks because if you have a payroll solution that's integrated with QuickBooks, then it can automatically get the same hours that are used for tracking in TSheets for your job costing in Knowify can also be used for your payroll in QuickBooks. And so it gives you one time tracking solution that syncs to both different softwares that require the hours for their reporting. The next question was how to get exchange rate costs and provincial, sorry, I can't pronounce that correctly, on the job level into Knowify. If this is about multiple currencies, I mean, we don't have anything that supports multi-currency. So if you do business in Canada and the US, then you would need to do the conversions before entering into Knowify. Basically, as far as tracking exchange rate costs, you could add that as another line on a purchase. I'm not sure this really gets into a QuickBooks question as much, but if you have more questions on that, definitely reach out to our support team. The last question I have here is there a way to sync inventory items with Knowify and QuickBooks so it reduces the number of product and both software systems match? I hate giving this answer, but the simple answer is there really isn't a way to sync inventory with Knowify and QuickBooks. We just use the items differently than QuickBooks does. As you have seen through this webinar, the products and services list can be used to purchase items. It can be used to invoice. And it's just not really built for a situation where it's supposed to be taking and adding to QuickBooks inventory. One of the most classic cases of this is, again, most purchases in Knowify are purchased for a job. And so if I buy something for a job, I don't want that to go into my inventory because I'm buying it for the purpose of using it immediately on that job. So I don't really have it on hand. I have it at a job site. And things like that are really why Knowify, doesn't have much integration with QuickBooks Inventory, and why we don't really have an inventory module in Knowify itself. It looks like that's all we have as far as questions go. Tomorrow's webinar will be on QuickBooks desktop integration for any of you guys who are interested in learning more about that. Ben will be leading that. Everyone who has tuned into his webinars know that he is absolutely fantastic at it. If you have more questions on this, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're at support@knowify.com, and we're always happy to work with you. Thanks everyone again for tuning in, and have a nice rest of your day.